Ikväll vill jag vända mig direkt till er, det svenska folket. Det nya coronaviruset prövar vårt land, vårt samhälle och oss som medmänniskor. Nu behöver varje person förbereda sig mentalt på vad som väntar. Vi har en allmän smittspridning i Sverige. Liv, hälsa och jobb är hotade. Fler kommer att bli sjuka. Fler kommer att tvingas säga ett sista farväl till en älskad. Det enda sättet att klara av detta är att vi möter krisen som ett samhälle, där alla tar ansvar för sig själv, för varann och för vårt land.
So, Manuel, Sigurd, what do you think about the Prime Minister's speech that early in the pandemic?
I think he has given only two direct speeches to the people, some interviews, of course, also. But what I reacted in the first speech that he said, we need, or I will protect life, health and jobs.
Jag som statsminister och den regering jag leder kommer att fatta varje beslut som krävs för att skydda så många människors liv, hälsa och jobb som det bara går.
And he did not make any priority, right? So we don't know if it's in the first case life, then the health of everyone and the jobs on the third level. He repeated this several times.
And he still said thousands would die.
Online and can look at where he already gives a prognosis of several thousand deaths. Made me even more feeling anxious and confused, to say it. Should we just accept it, or should we go to, as he said in the earth, protect life and health? Or should we maximum protect as many as lives as possible, or what? Or should we just go and accept this? It's horribly confusing from a prime minister.
What were your first thoughts, Manuel?
I agree. There was always been something different in the semantics, in the language of the press conferences or the appearance of the minister that got my attention from the beginning, compared to, for example, press conference in other countries. The focus has always been is on how much intensive care unit beds are free, or it was a little bit unclear is the priority was the money or the jobs, as Sigurd said. But the focus was a little bit unclear for me. The feeling was that it was not possible to avoid infection, and that we all end up infected. So if you listen to other press conferences, it's exactly the opposite. The focus is on measures to avoid infection in some way. So it's a feeling of security that the state, right or wrong, is trying to save lives. Is the main goal of the strategies. But I have never had that feeling here in Sweden, unfortunately.
No, I agree, and it was a bit on all the different levels. Professionally, in the society, it was almost like, oh, we can't do anything. And the former state epidemiologist said the same thing. They said, oh, everyone will get it anyway. So it seems like, okay, we're not going to do anything, but in 2 years we will see. And
exactly.
But if you don't do anything, it could be a complete disaster. So this does bring us to the herd immunity thing, because in the beginning we know that several countries openly discussed the herd immunity, like in the UK and in the Netherlands, and in Sweden, they still never really officially confirmed that they were aiming for it, but then from the emails already from March, which became publicly available, we do see that they were talking about herd immunity. And I also think all the actions they took seemed to be aiming at herd immunity, like the infections were going down. Oh, let's just open things again, or that the infections would go up again. So yeah, herd immunity. Is it feasible, ethical? Not really, I think. The WHO this week also said that the herd immunity strategy is unethical. The IMF also said it isn't good for economy. That's also something we've seen. So how could you defend herd immunity?
You cannot, in fact, as I see it, at all, because of different reasons. But before I come back to herd immunity, to continue what Manuel and Nele said about the communication of the government, I felt also confused. There is nearly a total lack of values and emotions as we talk about ethics in the pandemic in this session, right? It is as if it's only technocratic, as if there isn't human life, no human beings, no feelings, or all feelings and all the anxiety and fear and uncomfort in the population is met by curbs, PowerPoints, as if the whole thing is only technocratically, is some kind of the ordinary Swedish socio-engineering when it's totally robbed of feelings and moral ethics, human values, right? Back to herd immunity. Also, there are two strong reasons not to practice it. The first is simply, as I understood it as a non-expert biological, it never ever has worked in any societies before.
Nope.
You maybe can do it with a pig farm somewhere or so, but natural herd immunization as a method has never ever led to any result.
It will keep coming back.
But the ethical argument and political thereby is much stronger, because what you do if you let the virus spread through the whole population, either you do it uncontrolled, or as Giesecke has said in the beginning as the architect of the Swedish strategy, and he still says this in an Irish Times interview, which you can read as a quote, just a week ago, let us spread the virus through the whole population to people up to the 60s, and those 60 plus aged, we try to put a bit more emphasis on to protect, right? What happens then is that all the weaker and elderly citizens of a country are affected much, much more. And it's not just about biological age, 60 or 70 plus, it is also about social justice. Those who live in dense flats, communities, large families, low incomes, low education, and so on, and to have to use transport or public transport, buses, trains, and so on, have bad works, badly paid, and so on. These are all affected much more. So in fact, you produce a socially injustice by letting the virus spread through the population. And they had really the idea that this can be done in a controlled way, in a reasonable scale. And it could not, as the 6,000 death tolls show, and the 100,000s long-term sick, right? And all other countries, no one tried it, except the USA and Brazil and some more. But also other dictatorships like Russia and China didn't do it.
Well, they also paid for it. And I heard it this week, it was one of the headlines in the Belgian news as well, that indeed those from lower socioeconomic circles, they have been hit way harder. And now when the infections come back as well, it's also way more difficult to adhere to the restrictions. They can't really stay home. They don't have the money to afford babysitters, and so it's indeed like the survival of the fittest, and it seems that indeed nobody can be protected. And now I also think about the healthcare workers, because even the healthcare workers, I am a medical doctor myself, even if I don't work clinically, I still, I've been trained, I know everything about, or I should know everything about infection control, and even my colleagues are not allowed to wear mouth masks. Even even the people in the nursing homes, they were not allowed to wear protection gear. They didn't get it because it was not necessary. Manuel?
It is also interesting to remind that it is not just about ethical or strategical or socio-engineering, let's try this and that, or this is better or worse or so. It is also about somehow destroying the fundamental values of the modern democratic society, as this goes directly against principles in the constitutions of all European and other so-called civilized countries, where the human value, and it is the same value for everyone, is violated. So if you send the virus through to them all, you will violate, and that is what we have done, the human value, and it is also a violation of the Article 2 in the Convention for the Human Rights, which the European Court in Strasbourg will take care of after people in different countries have gone through the legal procedures in their own countries. They must do this before. It will be taken to the court in Strasbourg. And it's obvious that herd immunity violates substantially the human rights.
We indeed have not been guaranteed safety. Our governments, the human rights declarations are to protect our safety and also to provide us healthcare. And healthcare has not been guaranteed. Okay, it's a pandemic. It could get out of control in all the countries. That's what we've seen in Italy as well. We can't blame them because they were the first ones basically hit outside of China. But then still, Sweden saw it coming and they still didn't do anything. So,
and there is no economic profit at all.
No.
So my problem is in Sweden. In the USA, it's a bit easier to understand in the big scale of power fights. But in Sweden, what is the reason for practicing herd immunity? And at the same time, always denying in words, we don't want it, but in practice, they have done it. Maybe they are turning around this autumn. I'm quite sure they have got the point that it doesn't work, and the criticisms are not that strong as they were in the United Kingdom. Even
Boris the Butcher, the hashtag,
after one weekend and stopped it. In the Netherlands, they first said it, and then they said we never had done it, but also there took only 4 days. And in Denmark, it took only 2 days before they stopped it. Why could we never ever get a proper discussion about this idea of sending through the spread through the whole society, as Giesecke formulated this just recently? And as in practice, it has been done, because only flattening the curve for the clinical limit is not keeping it down maximum possible to the lowest possible spread, right? But it is a idea of a controlled spread, and that is totally unethical.
I wonder actually what if the Swedes would have been asked in the beginning in March, do you agree with this? And, this is the risk. Yeah, we will probably have thousands of deaths. If they would have accepted that with the same argumentation, okay, we can't go back in time, and you couldn't, the discussion clearly didn't happen. But I know in Belgium, when the first 1,000 people died, there was such an outrage, and then everyone realized, like, we don't want this. And yes, there are also now voices, and the last couple of weeks, it has been so annoying for me, because everyone, when they were resisting the corona restrictions, they were all like, oh, but look at Sweden, oh, but herd immunity. So basically the Swedish approach is even killing people outside of Sweden, because
Yes,
thanks to them,
yes.
they kill people outside.
Yeah, and
So-
there are messages in the media, but I cannot evaluate them, that as Swedes are active in the World Health Organization, especially GISIK, as an advisor also for India, that they have discussed to approach it even there. But I don't really know. There are messages about it.
Yeah, but even if they don't have the direct contact, they are giving interviews all over the place. From early on in the pandemic, they were giving international interviews to promote the strategy. And yeah,
yeah, and in the USA, it is obvious that Trump was not happy with the main advisor, Fauci, and his strategy. So he appointed another one, Scott Atlas, for a month ago, who explicitly argued for herd immunity. But there was a whole of an audience in politics, in publics, in medias, started by the Washington Post, who argued against this. And although Scott Atlas, in fact, advocates it, he publicly has taken it back. So no herd immunity. But Trump himself then continued to talk about herd immunity, but he hasn't understood what immunity is about. So he said, herd mentality will help us all. So it is also going on as an essential part of the of Trump's US strategy, if there is any strategy. But with regard to your question that we never ask the population in the country if they want to partake in this, what several have called the biopolitical experiment with the whole population. The Germans have discussed this very much, and they have said you can only go for it if you have the agreement of the whole population. In the same way as ethical guidelines are for medical clinical research projects, only if a person accepts to be set up for some risks in the vaccine production, for example.
That's what Cecilia also said in the beginning, like, I didn't give informed consent, we didn't give informed consent to this experiment, and it's indeed an experiment.
But I would like to read for you, because it's interesting. When I prepared this session, we are aware that there are ethical commissions, discussions, guidelines, and the World Health Organization has quite a well thought through a communication and process about ethics. So they have put up 4 principles, where the first is transparency, the second inclusiveness, consistency, and accountability. I don't want to read them all for you, even if it's just small sections. But what's interesting is this about inclusiveness. And if I read it, it says, those affected by allocation decisions, including individuals, communities, or countries, should be able to exert at last some influence over the decision-making process, as well as the decision itself. This also means that decisions should be open to challenge and potentially revisable, perhaps through an appeal process. And the accountability principle number 4 then says that those who make the decisions, in our case, the government and the agency, must also be held accountable. And I think this has not taken into account at all in the Swedish process. There was no transparency about the reasons behind all the figures and the method that had been communicated in everyday's press conferences and so on. And the government has only said, I rely totally, absolutely to the expert agency. And the expert agency is one leader with a staff, of course. And that's that's it. The population never ever had a chance to be included in the decision-making process about the strategy. And following the World Health Organization and ordinary discourse ethic, political ethics, this is undemocratic. It is totalitarian in a way, and it does not fulfill the normal standards for the interaction of the government, the agencies, the experts, also science, research, and the public.
It's one of the reasons, because the ethics, I actually don't know, because like in Belgium, you have every hospital has basically an ethics committee. And yeah, even not only the university ones, the ethics committees of smaller hospitals, they are basically usually, you know, approving incoming clinical trials. Are we going to participate or not? But the other duty they have is indeed, if there's something happening now with the Corona crisis as well, to manage they have ethics discussions, like how are we going to do this? But then it could also be that they, you know, if there is a child from Jehovah Witnesses or something, because they also have rules, you know, that they should not get blood or surgery or something. And, you know, those discussions, they also come from the local ethics committee, and then they decide, does anything like that exist in Sweden, Manuel?
No.
If a discussion like that happens, nobody discuss it, or?
No. You know, for me, this is a huge difference between Sweden and the rest of Europe, and it's the negation of science. It's the negation of science and the evidence. You know, when the pandemic started in Sweden, it was a little bit after in Italy or Spain or the rest of Europe. I was convinced of two things. The first one was, okay, the virus is coming to Sweden as in the rest of the world, so it's not different. Maybe not so explosively, but it's coming. And the second was. I was sure that the authorities in Sweden were going to apply the precautionary principle above all else, because the health system in Sweden is traditionally very oriented in this sense. I mean, it is not so easy to start a new technique or new things. It's usually exceptionally cautious when implementing new features in the healthcare. So it was a shock to me to see the exact deposit. And when talking about the potential contagion of asymptomatics or pre-symptomatics and so on, the mantra was all the time, there is no evidence, the evidence is weak. But even now, so when the possibility was right, in view of the articles of papers or science and so on, about the transmission by aerosols, for example, the answer was the same. The way of propagation are similar to the flu. There is no evidence, or the evidence is weak, even now. So, however, we were and we are facing a virus that we still do not know much about, and we don't know exactly what is going to happen with, for example, the chronic patients or the mild patients or so. So my question is, and I wonder it every day, why don't we act as a precaution, protect the population, maybe excessively? It doesn't matter. And if in a few months in the future there is evidence to the contrary, we can de-escalate the measures. But I couldn't understand it. I can't understand it even now. So
and if I understand, there were also no real discussions in the hospitals with the. No. Because here, even the retirement homes, they put everyone from the different levels, from the cleaning personnel to the direction together, like how are we going to cope? How can we coordinate this influx of patients and things like that? Because what I also think it's so confusing, like from big hospital, some people say, like from the Karolinska hospital, some people say like, oh yeah, we are, you know, overflowing, we don't have any beds anymore, it's crisis. And others say, oh no problem, oh we never had any problems with the beds. And it's the same hospital and it's about the same ward. So it's constantly that contradictory information. And to come back to the science thing, even from that pandemic 100 years ago, it was already clear that cities who went into lockdowns recovered faster in economy than if they didn't. And that's the thing with the pandemics, especially when it's that exponential growth. If you let it just spread in the society, then you can't stop it anymore. You have to stop it from the beginning. And if you did then everything correctly from the beginning and basically hammer down the curve, like in New Zealand, like in some Asian countries, then of course life can start again. But now it's just spread out everywhere, all over the place. In Sweden, what was it, the highest number of daily infections all over the summer, while in the other countries it really went down. But then yes, infections look better now, or look quite okay now compared to other European countries, but it's still the same virus.
What strikes me when you talk about Nele, about the question, where is the ethical in the decision making, lower levels in hospitals or a nursery, an elderly care home, also a school, and Manuel says it's nearly
not existing.
And there is a specific ethical dilemma which we can follow if we only trace the masks in Sweden, right? Because although all science says, and all practices, and there are no studies who verify empirical and so, and the conclusion is for me very simple. All masks are better than no masks. And
there is no harm.
Yeah, you're right. And they indicate that you are prepared to protect your neighbor, the one you meet, you work with your family and so on. And it makes us all aware that we must be aware. But the effect to hinder, and some say even, we got milder infections than stronger, because you get not as that much virus into your body if it anyhow moves in. But it doesn't matter. All masks are better than no masks, right? Yeah. What happens in the Swedish decision-making process, and where is the ethical dilemma? The fact that we do not even face an ethical dilemma is because it works like this. The government hands all power to the agency. Tegnell, as the agency leader for this section, says,
and the agency says but it's not our responsibility.
No masks are recommended because they have only recommendations and very few restrictions. So the no mask recommendation is interpreted in the communities and the regions and the hospitals and so on, that there is even a prohibition of masks. And we have so many incoming mails and letters and phone talks and whatever into our science forum, where people just are confused, unsafe, and even complain. And some doctors have to say, I quit if I'm not allowed to have a mask.
Or fired.
The efficiency of the masks is when everyone have them. Well, it's also there if only I wear them, but it's much, much higher if everyone wears this. So why, and if I tell these, my friends in Germany, in the UK, in Norway, in Finland, they just don't understand it. Are you joking? Because all of us are using the masks all the way. And now we get lots of arguments. Why are the infection increasing in those countries who wear masks? Should I answer, it's because they have masks? Nay, I must say, how much infection increase would you get without the mask? But that's just mathematical speculation. They don't want to hear the argument.
But so now I think there are only 3 or 4 countries.
An ethical dilemma about freedom, I would say. And the state who does not want to intervene in the citizens' life and give them as much as freedom as possible, on the one side. On the other side, they practice herd immunity and expose us for a biopolitical experiment. So the ethical dilemma is not just when every single decision maker, if you're a boss for a nursery or a school head or also a doctor in a section, it's only individualized, and there are, fortunately enough, more and more working places now who take the decision from the national state and the upper level of the agency to their own sovereignty. And they have the power, in fact, to decide, let's go for mask, because of what Manuel says, the precautionary principle. If we can be careful and avoid to do harm to life and health, then let's do it.
Now, one thing that has worried me from the beginning was the attitude of the population, of the citizens towards masks, because I mean, there is in our days there are a lot of information that and it's easy to reach it. Scientific information, medical information is very accessible today for all the population. So why are there no masks in the streets? I can't understand it, because there is evidence, there is sufficient evidence that they work in the community, and mainly in closed indoors environments where distance cannot be maintained, so hospitals, public transport. So also the Folsamyndigheten does not recommend them, but it is allowed to use masks in the community.
Yes.
So
you feel like a pariah if you wear one. So when I came outside, I always felt very not at ease, just because people were staring, and you felt that if you wear one, that you considered like a traitor of the state or something. And that attitude was so, yeah.
Yeah, man, what has society been like in critical thinking, maybe, I don't know, or decision for themselves, or there are no masks in Sweden.
I think it has to do with freedom and trust somehow. So wearing a mask is, of course, a way of delimiting your freedom in the way that you do not expose your whole face. You cannot communicate in this way with the body language and so. And it is a bit strange for us. Just a year ago or so, it was mostly Asian students, strangers, visitors, which had the mask all the time, and we felt a bit, it's the bird up there.
I like it.
That time is going on. Okay, it's and I was very surprised about Germany, where I was born, but because in March and April, the opinion from the judgment from the experts in virology, epidemiology, and science was masks would help us very much, but it's so strange for our culture. We don't know if we really can get our population to stop this. And what happened is that at the same time they communicated that this will help, this works, it makes sense, and it is even, as they said, a nice gesture. You indicate the other, your neighbor, that you are prepared to protect her or his life, right? So it's also about taking care of each other. And after just one more month between Easter and Pentecost, or so in June, nearly everyone accepted the masks. And now you have anti-corona demos and so on and so on. But this is not even 1% of the population, because 80-90 accepted and supported. In Sweden, this did not happen. The one reason is because the agency said it doesn't work. This was wrong, and it was against science and everything. But the people are so used to somehow even believe nearly religiously in that the national state has taken care of us, so that they're just swallowing it on the one time. On the other, they want to keep their freedom. So it's a very strange ethical thing. You have both the freedom and the trust to the power from above, which is not freedom. It is to accept others
have a
do it over your
question.
life. So that's very strange. And you need a cultural studies person or group or research project to figure out what this is about. Elizabeth Åsbrink says it's about people. Sweden had so many 100 years of peace. We are not at all prepared for crisis as the other European countries.
May I come back to that religious thing, because that's been clear that the masks are a political thing from the beginning, and I know in the Belgian, like in the Belgian law, there is normally some sort of a law that you're not allowed to cover your face and wear a mask because you should always be identifiable. And I think that also one of the reasons that law is there, because then basically against the Muslim religion where they completely cover up. And do you think that, for me, it seems far-fetched somehow that would be playing a role in the sentiment, like, I don't want to wear a mask. Okay, I can understand that people feel uncomfortable if you indeed see people like with the whole niqab thing, that they completely cover up because you don't see who's in there, and especially with the terrorist attacks in the last 20 years, I can imagine that people feel uncomfortable by that. But then I think it's so far-fetched that would be a reason against using masks.
It just takes 1 week to get rid of this uncomfort with the masks.
Yeah.
When we went to Germany or visiting my mother and friends in summer, it felt strange for us to put them up and down all the way, following the regulation. The restaurant, when you enter it, you have it there. When you sit down, you can take it off. When you go to the bar desk, you can have it. You must have it, and so on. But after just 2 or 3 days, you're comfortable, and you do express your own body language also with the mask. It can even be more sexy and whatever, because when we went on the streets where I lived as a child, there were 2, what's the word, skräddare in Swedish, 2 tailors, shops, where you could order a handmade shirt or even a whole dress. And then they had the whole window with unique handmade masks. You could match it to your shirt or your colors, or make it this or that. It was just, and it's used. It is a new accessoire in our public.
Oh yeah. So I'm used to all the parents now only from this face and the hair and the movement. Yeah, there is so much more to recognize people than just that face. And I guess Manuel for sure really knows it, because I still remember the first time I came into an operating theater completely covered up, and you have no idea who's standing in the room, and you don't recognize them. You have no idea if it's residents or like the big professors. But you get used to it, and then you do indeed recognize everyone.
Are so kind in Sweden. So, but maybe another reason is they are already so distanced from each other. They had so large distance. I don't know, but imagine 1 year ago, if I would have put my mask on the face and then entered the bank office, right? I would immediately have called the police. And as all countries all over the world don't feel it like that any longer.
No.
Some still do. Somalia, Eritrea, Syria, Yemen, and Sweden. It's the only countries where you don't need masks. And why do they interpret the non-recommendation of the agency as a prohibition? And even it is, but because my wife's best friend met another woman at the supermarket, and they say, "Oh, do you think you are wearing a mask? Do you really believe in this, or do you question the power of the state?" and things like that. So but it's so easy to change it. If we just would get a recommendation in 1 week, everyone would be happy with masks.
How do you feel like it in the hospital, Manuel? Because we got so many emails to Wetenskapsforum through other sources of people who are just afraid to go to the hospitals because they know that the healthcare providers don't wear masks, and they're more afraid of the surgery, they're more afraid of the healthcare workers to get COVID than of the surgery. And how, because for me it now feels there are so many yeah, there have been so many people ill. There have been so many families who lost people or know people who became ill, maybe that they have long-term effects. And do you see them in the hospitals? How do they feel about all of it? Because it seems that the whole society is just still pretending like it's not happening.
Now, from the patient's point of view, I have to say, I have met just one patient with a mask, just one. And there are a lot of them that ask me, why are you wearing a visir, facial protection, no mask, just a facial protection. A lot of them that ask me every day. So it's not, it's very, very strange for me. But one thing that has struck me from the beginning has been that even the medical staff have not had the critical capacity to read the literature, or at least the majority, or for the most part, they have been aligned in some sense with the Volkssammenheten.
Don't they feel responsible for their patients?
No, I don't feel that.
Because that's what I see from my colleagues here in Belgium. You know, they will not leave. All of them, they do so often very crazy days, lots of hours, because they will not leave their patients. They will operate their patients. Even a patient of if you have a cancer, we will operate you tomorrow. They will do whatever it takes because it's a patient. And in Sweden, I don't feel that they have that responsibility for patients.
Exactly.
All things turning around. When I just had breakfast this morning, before our session, there was a very small note in the daily paper that said, the boss for the whole Malmö city's section of hemvård and äldreboenden, also the nurseries, the elderly care homes, and those who visit elderly at home for to cook and clean up and so on, they all have to wear masks now. Because she said, oh, we are following the agency's recommendation and so on. But the recommendations say they can be used if there is a need. So she did not interpret it as a prohibition, as most of the sectors in Sweden still do, but she interpreted in the right way. As infection rates are going down, as the precautionary principle makes very much sense, as we need to protect both our elderly people and our staff, masks are better than no masks. So everyone is now obliged in Malmö from today on to wear them. That was good news, right?
Yes. Yes.
But the ethical, as we talk about ethics, and now we are again in political ethics, is who makes the ethically reasonable decisions in Sweden? Is it the national state? Is it the government? Is it the public health agency? Is it the region? Is it the community? Or is it the individual? And somehow it is the individual citizen, or if you're a boss and have some small power, not even the region leaders, also for some who are responsible for the whole medical clinical care of a landscape, they have the power to introduce masks, but they haven't done it, only in very few examples. They have stopped. So where is power ethically handled in this country?
But what also surprises me is that then people actually seem to take action if someone is doing something more than that the health authorities recommend. I know about a school in Sweden, which was there were people filing complaint against the school because they were demanding more restrictions than Folkhälsan. So they were called to Skolverket or whatever, because they wanted to protect their personnel and their students. And then they reported, like, they want to save people, they want to protect it. And that's something I've seen here in Belgium. Everyone seems so responsible. If you're a principal of a school, if you're a school teacher, you're responsible for your class. Everyone feels that responsibility, like we have to do this together. Everyone, and maybe, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
If you look at morality in a society or a communion, what you always have is that moral responsibility is born at the bottom, the basic line, from the bottom and up. Principles, regulations, rules, laws, and so on are coming top down. So what you need, and this is especially true in a pandemic that covers the whole of a society and the whole of the world, that's a pandemic definition, that there is a balance or a symmetry, if you want, in ethical responsibility from above to the bottom and from the bottom up. And the Swedes have only said, oh, we rely on our wonderful citizens and give them all thing, and we just feed them a little bit with this and that and make recommendations. Other countries have other problems. They have too much of a top-down decision making where people are starting to protest and so, and the courts have to interact and so. But the interesting question for ethics and political decision making is, how do we get this balance so that both the bottom up and the top down are leading to the same practice? Because first then we have a really, really efficient maximum protection against the virus spread and all that evil that comes.
But why is the society not asking questions? Okay, I've been reading up on my ethics material as well, and there have been big no's happening before, like in the wartime with the Nazis, that they did experiments on the Jews and the disabled, and also in the US that they did experiments, syphilis studies on the former slave population and everything. And is it something, because that's also something that we've seen in Sweden, I at least felt that as a foreigner, that they also said, oh, it's only the foreigners who get sick, or I just don't get it that people accept those things in society. In Belgium, there was an outrage. If there was there was a physician lying on the intensive care, there's an outrage. There's a child dying. The whole country was mourning. Those things happened in Sweden as well, and nothing really happened. So why do they accept it? Why do they accept it if it's in the newspaper that indeed the elderly, that they're just getting euthanized basically, or get the palliative sedation? Why do they accept it?
So I would need a cultural studies project together with medical scientists and legal scientists, and so to really find the answers. I have only 2 or 3 hypotheses. So the most depressing and dark one would be that people have lost their, let's say, capacity of love to the neighbor. You don't give a damn. It doesn't matter at all. That is, in fact, not my impression, being around both with friends and so on. But there is something with social distance in Sweden and Finland, which is not there in Denmark, Norway, and the other European countries, where you live much closer, where you are interested in securities, where you intervene in each other's life, where you have opinions about right or wrong. And so we leave each other in peace much more. Maybe it's that easy. But there are also signs that in the neoliberal economistic society, into which also Sweden has turned, as many others, the economistic attitude to human life also makes it much more difficult to let solidarity flourish, non-money based exchange processes and so. The other thing is, as Elisabeth Åsbrink has written about and was criticized heavily, but I think there is lots of it. When I came to Sweden as a 20-year-old student, it was so obvious that this country never ever had to learn any lessons from the First and Second World Wars. Because every family in Europe is affected by this. Migration processes, victims, remembrance stories, violence, how the evil can just take over everything and so on. I worked in Auschwitz as a student for a month, digging in the soil and finding human bodies and so on. So
I got one email.
Sweden was a wonderful country to live in. You were so safe, and the welfare state took care of everything. We could rely on each other, and we did it. So there was so much confidence and trust, which I'm really afraid is threatened in this country. And confidence are a presupposition for moral.
I and a few of the others of the VETCOF got an email from a young, 20-year-old as well. And she actually said like, oh, why do you want to restrict our freedom? We are the first generation who suffered. Basically, we are the generation who suffered and none of the other generation. And I felt so hurt. I'm like, my grandparents, they were in the war. My parents are just born after the war. Now they have internet, they have WhatsApp, they can have full closets of clothes, they can buy them online, they have their phones, they're constantly connected. I also still know the time before the cell phones and everything, that indeed if you traveled you couldn't be connected. And she really, you saw it from that email, she truly believed that she was the first generation in decades who suffered.
That's human somehow. But there are more and more people protesting from the bottom up. There's so many opinion letters in the papers and in the radio, and there are so many more people wondering. Maybe 20%, maybe 50, some I don't know. But then we feel this in this science forum also. We get so many questions and so many statements.
But people are also afraid to speak up in Sweden. I think you feel it in the hospital as well, because we've all been speaking up. And for me as a scientist, it's weird that you speak up and then you're kind of, you run into a wall. I mean, it's like, we're scientists, we're professionals, and why can't we have an open discussion? And I heard it from many people that they agree behind the scenes, but they don't dare to raise their voice.
Exactly, I agree. It was very difficult to have an open conversation about that. It was like a taboo in nonsense. So not all the college absolutely, but it was not easy. Maybe it's something deeper.
That Jantelagen.
As a part of the community or the society, I don't know, but it was a shock for me. It was very difficult to talk about that with the college from Sweden. It was like two parts at the hospital. The doctors, the foreign doctors, and the Swedish doctor. So it was very easier to talk about that with the foreign doctors than with the Swedish doctors. It's like you are a bad citizen if you talk about that, or you are unrespectful from your country if you talk about that. That is not a war against Sweden, but it's I think it's really difficult to understand why, because we just would like to criticize or in a constructive way, not unconstructive.
There is something nice in it also in the Swedish way. You don't bother the other, you don't argue heavily, you talk very calmly, even if it's someone explosive.
I miss that passion.
Well, and I know, I feel the same. But as an immigrant, which you are not, Nele, but Manuel and I are, we have to stick to this. I can't go the Spanish way and just, they become afraid of me. And so on. I can't even argue in the German style with heavy critical arguments, and they become afraid. But what I want to say is, the thing that makes it difficult to have a good discussion, also ethically, because ethics is about right and wrong and good and bad. And we negotiate all the time about what is right, what is wrong, what is better, what is good, and what is bad. That this cannot really take place in a good way in Sweden. I think it has to do with that the whole pandemic management has been politicized. It has become so political because the government moves the whole thing to the agency, and the agency is not elected by the people. They have only their own image of reality and their own task to go after. And as they do not cooperate with the scientists, They could have set up immediately a large, broad scientific committee with 20 or 40 of the best experts in Sweden in order to negotiate about what is right and wrong. But they decided we do it ourselves. We don't even listen to scientists. And when they come as the 22, they are just problem makers, they are troublemakers. We do know it all. And science and an open democratic discussion doesn't work like that. And the transparency, inclusiveness principles, not only in the World Health Organization, but also in our constitutions in democratic societies say it. So it is so politicized that we cannot, and that also leaders on the local level, a school head, a nurse, or a clinical or a chief a doctor for a section at the clinics, and so no one can make really a communication, a talk about what is right and wrong. So there is some kind of, when let's say, organized irresponsibility and organized non-ethics taking place in the society, which makes me very, very much worrying. And the only one who can break this through is the government by opening up, have a participatory discussion, opening up arenas and so on. And that is why we have decided to turn the Science Forum into an official not, but into a visible group. That is why the Royal Academy of Sciences has decided to establish and work out an expert commission because the national state, the agency and the governments did not listen at all, not even to the Royal Academy of Sciences. This is incredibly to believe in other countries in Europe. But it has taken place. So it's an organized, so there was a famous sociologist in Germany and the English speaking, his book title was The Organized Irresponsibility. So how do you practice that an ethical dialogue is not possible anymore?
No, for me, it indeed feels if indeed it would have been other people in charge at Folkhälsan, that it could have been completely different reaction. That if it wouldn't be Giesecke, Tegnell and Carlson over there, that it could have been like a normal reaction like in the other countries. What do you actually think about that law of Jente? Of course, that's something that have been lauded and I came across, but I never really read it before this pandemic, because everyone should be the same, and you do see that in Swedish society. You indeed shouldn't stick your head out of the cornfields. But then when I read it, I actually read it on Wikipedia, and then my first thoughts was actually like, oh yeah, no wonder that the suicide rates are high in the Nordics. Because I can read it aloud, like, you're not to think you are anything special, you're not to think you are as good as we are, you're not to think you are smarter than we are, you're not to convince yourself that you're better than we are. I think it sounds so horrible, and if you think about it, when you read about it, it was satire. It's a book written about that little tiny village where everyone knows each other and where you shouldn't do anything wrong. And then it somehow became like, oh, the social norm in Sweden, the law of Jente is a good thing. And when I read it through, I was like, how can people adhere to this? And basically, and that's for me something that I noticed from the beginning. In Belgium, everyone really tries to be, I don't know, unique, and let's embrace that you're different. And in Sweden, everyone just has to be the same. And now, indeed, if you ask any questions about the approach, you're different. So you're against the Swedishness.
Exactly.
But we can put it another way around also. So about the Jente law, I don't know what to think. That there is obviously something in it, you say. But on the other side, it's complicated. I would need really a good research project with the historians, political scientists, cultural analysts, and so on.
But you don't have time for that in times of a pandemic.
Already books in Germany who have already in the summer, they have had such projects going on. in Germany already after 4 months, and it's very, very interesting. And there are now taking place conferences in philosophy and whatever all around, but not in Sweden. And the philosophy quiet, the analysts are quite there, but there are more and more coming. But couldn't we talk a little bit about how would the society look like if it would manifest what is important for us, ethically, politically, scientifically, in the medical care, because Sweden could also turn around. Let's say we have a government who constantly is in communication both with its population, through television mostly best, directly addressing the public, and in communication with the agency and the scientists and other representatives, because in discourse ethics you must have a representation of all who are affected by the problem. So you need a broad arena, a broad forum of representatives for both science, the patients, the doctors, also some ethicists, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and then the economy as well, like because that's what they.
Course, but that could be in the second way, because the economy is just a consequence of the virus spread. So you could have a special process for this, and the government is much, much better in economy than in health politics, it seems like. But anyway, then you would need a government who is able to make decisions after having these participatory communicative processes.
Do you still think it will happen? I don't know.
This would also further and nurture the processes I called earlier bottom up, so that top down and bottom up, so that citizens and people would feel safe again and say, we have a process where our voices are heard, also our fear and our discomfort. And we do not need to stick to any crazy Bill Gates and whatever theories to feel safe. And we could.
But indeed, I think indeed that there should be some discussion. And I also sent you the cartoon beforehand, because that's what I feel about Sweden, that you have that ethical cartoon that, there is a train coming, and if you don't do anything, it will kill 4 people. But if you switch the handle, it kills 1. And what I have the feeling that Sweden did, they just turned away and they walked away, and they didn't even discuss it. It was like, oh, we're going to see in 2 years. And for me, that's been quite weird that they just completely avoided the discussion. And apparently I heard in Spain and in France, there is a discussion like acting like a Swede, that indeed that's what they do. They just, something is happening. Someone is killed in the accident. They turn around and they don't even discuss them.
That's very sad, because the Swedes have also other skills, or we as Swedes, I would say. I'm also a citizen in 2 countries and a Norwegian somehow. But let's look at traffic policy, right? We have.
So yes, Tegnell now said that the corona is less dangerous than walking in traffic.
If I have lost a very close relative in a traffic accident, which rather is produced by the state, who makes a crazy 100 kilometers way where they send out people walking and so on. But anyway, we have the zero vision, and it still runs the whole of society, right? And it has taken down the death tolls from 1,000 to now 250, 300. I worked in mobility. I led a research project on mobility and techniques early on for 4 years with a large group. So it's below 300 again. Why?
How can they then say that traffic is more dangerous?
Yes, why can't we have, like New Zealand, a zero elimination virus strategy, even if we know we can't come down to zero? For human beings are always like that. But if we just strive for it, we will heavily decrease the numbers and the suffering and the victims, right? And another thing, I wanted to talk about also, maybe in the end, and I don't know how long we will go. That is what we do with the remembrance and the memory of the suffering and the death.
Yeah.
We can go on a bit and compare traffic policies and virus politics, because Sweden could go on in another way and mobilize their engines.
I don't know. I kind of lost hope a bit. Everyone was thinking that they would change practice quite early on, and then you still saw nothing was happening from Volkshelsa, nothing was happening from the government. But I was indeed also thinking about, many of the young generations, 18 to, what do I say, 30, 35-year-olds have been continuing their lives as normal. Or almost as normal, okay, because it's the elderly who have been, hiding in their summer cottages and shielding. And I guess also people who have been confronted with chronic diseases have also been shielding. But then that part of the society, they just have been going on because they see it as their right. But then if you think indeed back after a few years, well, because they kept partying and going, having private parties, and even if there were no mass parties, well, they helped spread the infection. They contributed to those 6,000 deaths, and probably even more if during the next few months. And for me, I would feel so guilty if I would know that I was the one who infected my grandmother. Luckily, she's still safe, but then I've really been avoiding contact because I don't want to be the one who basically then kills my grandmother. And okay, you don't know, you never know who, if she would get ill, it could have been through another way as well. But for me, it's how will they feel about it in a few years when they realize, okay, that they don't realize it now when they're young, that they don't completely realize the impact. It's one thing, but then basically they will be responsible for this, co-responsible for this pandemic too.
Yes, but I have heard a lot of time privately, they are going to dead anyway. So I don't want to sacrifice. Nay, I have heard this.
Yeah, me too. And they're gonna die within a year anyway.
Yeah. So
it's against the ordinary. It's both against the constitutions and our ordinary value system that we have had in Europe and built up for thousands of years, right? Not only with the help of Christianity, also Jewish, Muslim, all religions have this taking care of the other inside. So we should not victimize it. But that's also what's taking place as some kind of a very worrying consequence of this kind of pandemic management, right? Because every life has the same value. Yeah. If I live one more day or one more week, or even if I would be 90 at a nursery and I use the internet, I maybe have been a biologist who is a specialist in vaccine. So maybe it is me, 90 years old, who only lives half a year longer, that by internet sends the right thing to my colleagues in Harvard and Tübingen and wherever, and they make the vaccine. So no one knows, but that's just speculation. But
but there are still so many 70+ people professionally active.
Every human, it should never ever be quantified. Every life is worth to live, and it has value of its intrinsic own, right?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I know several scientists or doctors who are still active above their 70s or 80s, and I think it's so wonderful, and they all have their history, and for me it's so. I can't understand it that they have that attitude, oh, they will die within 6 months anyway. They're still parents, they're still grandparents, and you can't just, it could also be someone of their own age. There are young people, there are children dying. Now in Belgium, there is a 4-year-old on intensive care that's the same age as my son. He's in intensive care. He can't, a little child, he can't breathe. And okay, nobody's, okay, it's but still, you know, where is that empathy? And I actually heard that there are also people in their 60s who are basically close to retirement or in their retirement. They also have the same attitude, like, oh, those in an elderly home, they will die. It will be them in not such a long time. It's your parents.
I'm worried about that. The Swedish pandemic management is not only doing harm to the suffering, the many death tolls and so on we talked about, but it's also doing harm to social justice and the population's soul, moral souls.
Yeah, for me it hurts.
Because it enhances or accelerates processes like this. If you already think the only good life is the strong, the young, the success.
You're not allowed to suffer, yeah.
You already have some kind of a contempt for the weak, for the sick, and the blessed, and the stranger, and the Jews. Someone start again, and so on.
Yeah.
To have that already, but if you run this strategy for only the middle class and the strong, you enhance it all the time, and we should not do it. And we are not practicing lockdowns in Sweden, and we will not in the other European countries, I hope either. But a lockdown, and the same thing for the masks, leads to a common solidarity, because everyone must contribute his or her own share to it. And this was the reason, for example, for the evangelical churches, also the Lutheran churches, and also the Catholic churches in Germany in March until Easter, to support the government's lockdown strategy, even if this was very, very painful for the citizens. My mother really suffered because she's so social and so on. Even if she is 89 and multi-sick, she runs around, and it's horrible torture to just stay indoors and so on. But anyway, their argument, and this was one of my best friends who was the leader for the church at that time, he said, everyone then contributes with his or her equally.
Yeah.
Then we stop it, and we can all be safe again and go on and see what happens. And that's the difference in all these countries who had lockdown. The post-lockdown spheres were very nice and comfortable, and people could feel, okay, we all have done this together. And this is, in my view, historically, the Swedish model from the 50s, 60s, 70s onwards, where we mobilized the whole populace to make life better for every one of us. What's happened with this?
Yeah.
I have missed also a more critical position from health workers at the hospital, because it's our responsibility to avoid an infection with the patients. So I'm not saying this in the sense of a destructive criticism, but on the contrary. But I think it could be very interesting to have an open discussion about that. Everyone can learn, everyone can improve the healthcare, and we can, in some way, to protect the patients that is coming to us, to the hospital. So from an ethical point of view, I felt not so good, I would say.
So what you say is that we would need some kind of common corona ethics communication processes at all levels.
Exactly.
The doctors together, the doctors and the nurses, only the nurses, the trade unions, and so on, because the national state doesn't do it for us any longer. So we have to do it ourselves. And it's not only the individual, you can take it bottom up, through the whole society, hope for a government that will respond, right? That would become some kind of a. So let's talk about corona ethics, all of us, in different contexts, right?
Yeah, it's something I've seen also in other countries, and everyone contributes and everyone does something. And if you're a shop owner, if you're a hairdresser, if you're a teacher, everyone thinks, how can we stop this? And in Sweden, it's all like, oh, but the government says, oh, they know what they're doing, and everyone just waiting. And yeah, to just come back to an earlier point as well, I was also surprised by how can I say brainwashed, how the society took some of the arguments from the authorities and they just repeated them without questioning. Like the thing, like one of the things that shocked me very much is like, oh, it's the foreigners who brought it to the retirement homes because they're unhygienic. How the hell can they say something like that? Why is there no outrage? If someone would have said that in another country, the person would be crucified. It's so racist. And yeah, I've also heard it. I've heard that same statement repeated by several people, also people who grew up in other countries, but then adapted the Swedish feeling. Okay, I may look like a Swede. I'm not a Swede. I'm a foreigner as well. And it's how can't they see that this is really a no-go? And even the authorities said things like that. Always the foreigners who die. Always the foreigners who get. Why are there not? Yeah, why is there no outrage again? But
there are reasons behind. It could have worked out in a totally different way. Sweden also. I learned from my political scientists, so friends in political science, that there is a structural, not just tradition, it is nearby a law. It's not a fixed law, but it is a long and very strong tradition. That you have a couple of agencies which are politically decided about who has the power to lead such an agency. But this leader can then do what is expected from them. That is to work as some kind of an expertise for the decision making. So there is a share of power between the agencies and the governments, including the parliament sometimes. And this has worked quite well in many cases in peace times. But when it is now under test in a crisis, which is somehow even worse than a war, a military process, because the virus is not, as Macron says, going like, we are not in a war with biology. We cannot. This is about animals, humans, niches, habitats, the whole planet's environment, where we humans have messed it up. So it's not a war, but it's even more difficult to encounter pandemics of this kind with this virus, which is not just going away as SARS-1 or so. We are learning all the time, and maybe you as scientists have to teach us all the time. So the old way of sharing power does not work any longer. So Sweden must have a totally new discussion about how decision-making takes place. And as we have a government where there's a coalition that has not real support, it is in between the right and left. And is it right or left, or what is it? And will the prime minister survive until Christmas or not? We already have such a weak government and also parliamentarian politics before the virus enters the country. And we have the agency which never ever has been tested. And when this agency has been tested, both in Ebola in Africa and in the swine flu, it has already produced failures and a disaster, and the same people are there still. So what do you expect if the prime minister hands over all power and excludes the populace and the science from this? But it could have been done in another way, and I'm still hopeful that it can change course, and things are happening now. But not really.
I think you're the most hopeful of the three of us. But can I actually bring it back to the hospital side again? Because I'm actually wondering, did you the triage? Of course, I also learned in the med school, and you do have to make decisions as a clinician, and because it's also no point of prolonging life or prolonging suffering, you have to make those decisions as a clinician. But then, there have been documents circulating of triage criteria from March already. There have been people saying that it didn't happen. But I had a feeling it's for sure already happened, that people didn't enter in the hospital. I know about 2 people from a contact of a friend of mine in his in his network, friends of his, colleagues of his, who died at home because they were denied healthcare. So there has been triage. Why is this not discussed? And okay, we don't want to have a collapsing healthcare system. So you have to be coping. And in Italy, we know that the situations have been dramatic, that they have been de-intubating patients and everything. But those things, is it just, how did it happen in practice then? Because hospitals have been under huge pressure in spring, and they will be now again. Personnel shortages, many people coming in. The personnel has to be protected. How, Manuel?
The most important difference is that the mantra here is we have to save 3 places, and in the other countries we have to save lives. So this is the main difference for me. I'm not the expert in intensive care units, but when the criteria, as you said, for admission to the Stockholm intensive care units came to light, it was in the middle of March, and we have 1 disease per day, and we could see the criteria. I don't want to criticize my colleagues because it's not easy. It's not easy, and I understand it's hard to decide who is going to have a tube or not. But the philosophy of saving places rather than trying to stop the contagion in the community seemed illogical for me, very illogical. And from an ethical point of view, I didn't feel so comfortable with that. So a different thing compared with to the rest of Europe is that in the press conference, as I had said, the insistence was there are 3 places in intensive care units. So it was,
in the other countries, indeed, we're ramping up. We need more beds.
Exact. Yeah. We have to buy a lot of respirators. We have to try to recruit doctors around the world. We have to fight against all together, as you said. We have to fight together against the virus, against the pandemic, as non short of sense of community, sense of power together. But I miss it here. So.
But would you say then that there hasn't been really a triage situation, even if I remember an article of a chief doctor in Stockholm at the ECMO, the specialized intensive care unit, who has described in detail the triage situations he was forced into without any support from anyone in the government or the legislation or so. But mainly, there has been obviously a kind of a pre-triage. That is, that one has deprioritized patients in order to keep the 3 intense bed empty. But my question is then, what kind of reasoning is this with regard to protect life and health and even jobs, as Löfven has said, because an empty intense bed does not save any life. No. It is the patient in the intense bed that saves life. So did one think that if we keep away the patients from the hospitals, then we will not overwhelm it? And as you say, all the other countries, and especially the nice stories in the European Union, which people like to attack all the time. But all I know from Germany and France, and now the last week between the Netherlands and Germany, is that if you have empty beds in one country, you can send patients to the other country, or you can increase, and also Sweden has marvelously increased the numbers in very short time. So it's really an impressive thing. But if they have increased the numbers of beds, why didn't they use them then instead of palliative care? That is the question, which is anyhow now openly discussed. So we do not need to spend so energy on this, because this is now moving into the public consciousness of all citizens, that things are very, very bad. And the official term morally in ethics is ageism, the contempt for the old. And our question is the contempt for all weak and sick.
Why don't we talk about avoiding infected? This is avoided infected. What happens to patients that don't need an intensive care unit bed and is not so bad, but is infected as well? So do you know what is happening to them? Is this a very, very tough question? I know, but I think it should be very, very important to focus in avoiding infection, not just in saving beds at the hospital. So
how is the attitude?
Only a zero strategy, an elimination strategy, because Sweden is not in the middle, but New Zealand and the zero elimination, there are others on the one side, Brazil on the other, who says doesn't matter at all. It's just that you forget about it. And you know the many graves by military and so on. And Sweden is not in the middle, it's more towards Brazil and US. And US is going up forth and back. Sweden is not really transparently telling us what they do. So, but only as I get you right, Manuel, is the zero elimination strategy makes it possible also to protect the weak, to keep the beds in accordance with what we have mentioned.
How is the attitude now among the healthcare professionals? Because in Belgium, Belgium has been hit hard. No wonder, it's so densely populated, it's so central in the middle where everything is happening between all the big countries, where it's also really tough. And we didn't even have a government when the pandemic started. But then, people are tired. They worked so extremely hard in spring. They reorganized everything. All the elective surgery has been postponed when the capacity was so much under pressure. But then still over summer, people really needed a break. I know about people who actually went on a holiday so they would not be called back to the hospital. But now it's there again. They are so exhausted, and they managed to do it once to really take care of this horrible amounts of patients, they will do again, but they are tired. They don't have that resilience anymore as they had in spring. And I was actually really, a friend of mine, she's a nurse as well, and I was so proud of her. So she was like, she also got corona very early on when the protective equipment wasn't there, but she was so, no, it's my job, I will take care of them. And I was so impressed by her. And we as healthcare workers, especially if you stay in your own country, you're not prepared to go into basically a war zone, or you don't, it's something else if you're a doctor and you go to with MSF or something, then you really seek dangerous situations for yourself. But now everyone basically ended up in it, working with patients with a very infectious disease, and also a lot of suffering because you do lose patients. How is it in Sweden? How do the physicians and nurses, because it has been tough. No, it is tough if you see lots of people dying.
We are tired, but there has not been a single protest, a single movement about that, and there are a lot of male in Stockholm that are leaving the country. I think more or less 100 doctors from Karolinska or from Stockholm, and more or less
Many nurses,
yeah, 300 or 400 nurses. But I think it would be easier to talk about that, and discuss it, and try to have a consensus again among us, and what can we do in the future? Who can we avoid the same situation that in the spring and so on? But it's very, very difficult to talk about that. It's like a taboo.
And the second wave could be worse than the first one,
Yeah,
especially since it spread all
sure.
over the place. It could be worse.
Oh, sure.
So and many hospitals have already a shortage of physicians and nurses. So yeah.
But the mantra is the new normality is in October.
Okay.
This is the mantra. So we have to do as always. We have to operate as always. We have to take care of the patient as always. But we are not robots.
No.
So it's not so easy. So it's like it's like a negation again.
This is not happening.
Exactly.
No.
So it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. I also think it's morally really. It's been hard for me because I did enjoy working in Sweden. I did make the active decision to move to Sweden also as a professional, as a researcher. And for me, it hurts that I have, it hurts that I have those ethical questions, that my moral compass is just completely lost in this thing, because I've seen so many things that I think are like, no, why? And no outrage. Why is nobody reacting?
It is intellectually and also emotionally even more demanding.
Yes.
With the second waves, there are waves all the time.
Yeah, everyone is tired of it.
And because you must deal with all these questions. What did we learn something from the spring? Why didn't we learn something? What should we learn? How should we do now? And so on and so on. I think anyhow, so this makes it even more emotionally and also ethically painful, but it produces an ethical stress, so to say, on everyone's life. Also those who are not sick, but especially those in the healthcare systems and politicians and so on. But I can see lots of signs, if you take it down, that things are changing somehow, or that they are almost, things are happening in the country, right?
So.
There are these, as I said, much more support for masks from bottom up, and from top down, forget it, but it's just a matter of time, I would say. Or a matter of infection rates, rather, because they think like an engineer all the time. There are people talking to each other. There are many where I'm really uncomfortable, that they are unsensitive for the other. But anyhow, it is also easier to talk with others, even if they have another opinion, and get them, as I said, time is going on.
Yes, I think your bird says that it's almost time to wrap it up.
There are this, as I said, the regional chief for Malmö elder care now tells them you have to wear masks. There is Umeå in the healthcare system, you have to wear masks. I have a date with my hair cutter next week. I will phone her on Monday and say, I only come to you if you don't have masks, so please don't be so proud of being Swedish. Go the European right way now, otherwise you will lose me, and so on and so on. It can. So I think more and more people in different levels of the society are getting the point. We cannot cope with this in the same way in Sweden as we did in spring. So
Let's hope so.
this, what I said, what we would need a common ethical discussion about what is right and wrong, and also rational discussion scientifically what is right and wrong. That is much easier because that is already worked out by the scientists.
Yeah.
So the plans.
Yeah, the science is there.
And there you have also the European Union, because it is obvious that we have already a European Union response to the pandemics, which you can read on the internet.
We have to coordinate these measures to make life easier for Europeans. The clearer the rules are, the better citizens can deal with them. And this is why the European Commission put forward a proposal a while ago. Its adoption by national governments will now bring clarity to people.
And there is a real politically hot strategy for how to share vaccines, how to manage the vaccination. But there is a very strong emphasis from the German chairship for the European Union and the health minister to also coordinate all countries' policies in pandemic management.
And learn from each other, and not like Sweden, like, oh, we're the only one doing the good thing. Learn from each other.
Everyone says already, just as a side last, we will not do it the Swedish way. That is already a saying. We will not become the new Sweden here.
I hope so.
It has to stick also to a much more closer cooperation, and it is not just negotiation. We do it this way. How do we do it together the best way? But the health organization's head has been very, very clear about this. This can only be encountered if we regard it as a global planetary common challenge, and we work for solutions together. So Sweden has very big problems in the European country now.
Which will have a very long effect, I'm afraid.
Has not covered it, but I have also a consultancy in Brussels, for example, right? So they must really be careful not to be regarded as the
image
guy who runs it along. So this is also on its way. And there was also a message that Löfven already had his mask when he went to Brussels yesterday or so, or some days ago, and he was not forced to have it as last time because they took a photograph in summertime by Löfven with the mask in Brussels. And then he answered, when the Swedish journalist asked him, why did you have a mask? Oh, it is because all the others have it. I cannot be without it. But now he had already put the mask on his face before he went to Brussels. That's almost a very small step. Okay.
And the Queen supports it, the Swedish Queen.
Yes.
She could. The next step is that she then also wears with Swedish art, like the Belgian royals do, with like René Magritte, and then they both support the local fashion and art and the Swedish population. The Swedish safety.
I hope so.
I think we should almost wrap it up. My family life is invading the Zoom call. So I want to thank you for having this discussion. I think it was really interesting and worthwhile, and I don't know, it helps me to think things through. So
thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Manuel.
It might be continued because we have only touched very, very few of the crucial problems. And some of them marginal. So this must go on.
It's a start. But we almost talked for 2 hours. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.